We are. Hello, people. Happy whatever month it is, the end of July. So we're actually getting into the first harvest, aren't we, Robin? Because Lammas
Well,
is the
in
first
terms of the
harvest.
hay, they've already had the first cut.
Yeah.
They had the first cut, I think, because we had hay delivered on Sunday, and I
Mm,
think the guy said it had been cut in May.
yeah.
And oh, when you get that first batch of hay and the smell, it's
Yeah.
kind of almost like
Like,
bread or biscuits or baking or something.
I
I said
don't want
to
to be
him,
anywhere else. I'll just lie here and breathe.
yeah, I said that was where I was going to sleep that night because it's
Absolutely.
heavenly. But
It's
it smells because the weather wasn't that great and we had to move the delivery because of the rain. But it smells of sunshine and warm fields.
It does. It does. And I mean, people will know it because you know the new grass smell when you've just cut the grass in your house. This is that up 10 orders of magnitude. And it
So sweet and there's a dryness. That's why I think it's kind of like baking because it smells of that sweet, warm, dry, edible.
yes, very edible. Yeah. And not that it would do us very much good because we don't have all the right innards for eating hay, but still.
Not a long enough gut and the wrong
All the
flora.
wrong flora and fauna and everything,
Yep.
we just weren't meant to do it. So no.
No, sadly.
No, so yeah, and also Lammas is the old
Mm,
first harvest.
yeah.
And there is autumn, the autumn equinox, which is second harvest, and Samhain, which is the third harvest in the old ways that we know. But I've been out in the garden all morning, and Robin has been doing things too, and I'm into composting at the moment. I am very into composting. I was out in the garden this morning clearing one patch where it's got about 10 roses, 10 or 11 roses in it, and they're lovely. They're big, bushy roses, but they've all been swamped by nettles have come up, which I didn't want, and the grass has grown too long around them. And one of them, I've never seen anything like it. It was being cuddled by a rosemary bush. I mean, the rosemary was literally with bits of rosemary round the bush.
Mm.
And it was sort of like, no, guys, we can't do this. Because the rose was there going, I'm choking, I'm not getting any light. It's awful. I can't breathe. And so it was like, make some space. But of course, this meant you ended up with barrow loads of stuff, which
Yeah.
have gone to be composted. And so I was talking again on Monday with a group about composting, and probably several of you compost in your garden as well. And there is this thing about mixing your greens and your browns. So, your green waste matter and your brown waste matter, which can be sort of twiggy, cardboard, dead leaves, that sort of thing. And your greens is like the fresher leaves and the stems and that.
It's the wetter stuff,
The
isn't it,
wetter
really?
stuff. This is
Yeah.
one of the big problems, isn't it? Because the twiggy stuff is relatively dry and the greens is wet. Now, I do a thing called inner composting, which is very useful and people enjoy. And in that, because you've got four things in you, you've got your guts, your instincts, you've got your feelings, and you've got your thinking, your mind, and you've got your intuition. The two that usually give most people most problems are your feelings and your thinking. And your feelings in the system that I use, you can think of like the green, the wet green stuff, and your thinking is the dry brown stuff. And the mixing of those and how they work together is really important. I mean, you see this in your garden, don't you, when you do it? So what happens if I get too much green?
Well, if you compost it, it's going to be mucky and slimy and probably quite smelly.
Yep, I would run with the smelly, definitely.
Yeah. Hence the brown. And also, if it's wet, it's very compact and there's no air.
That's
Because
it.
the compost needs air.
Yes.
because those little microbes, those
Mhm.
wonderful little allies of ours,
Yep.
they need that air because
Yep.
they're not anaerobic. They need oxygen.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you get the anaerobic ones, and they're the ones that smell.
And they're the ones that actually don't turn all the ex-garden rubbish and ex-kitchen rubbish that you put in there into good soil. They just end up being slimy stuff that no seed wants to grow in. I was about to say no self-respecting seed wants to grow in.
Yeah, but it's that slimy stuff, that slimy, smelly stuff, and you just know that it's not what you want. You want the dry, really, like, I'm of a certain age, so I think of David Bellamy, where he would just get his hands in.
Yes.
But that's the stuff you need. That's dry and crumbly, and it doesn't have a smell, a nasty smell. It might have a specific smell to it, because everything does, but it's not that horrible oozy stuff. And you just look at it and you know that it's good.
Yeah, yeah. And your plants know it's good, don't they? You know, you put something on into the compost that you've made, or you grow your seeds in it, and they go, oh yeah, this is all right, we can do our stuff here. And the same.
Well, if it's anything like the piles that we have here, things just grow in it.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you've got, particularly at this time of the year, you've got all the grass seed and the nettles, of course, and then you've got a bit of rain and you've got a bit of sun, and it all just woof.
Yep. And I mean, I haven't got a big enough one here at the moment, but I have been known when it's sort of grown stuff all over it, just to cut what has grown and give it a bit of a pull and leave it where it is. And I usually cover it up with something if I can. I mean, if I've got enough long grass, it's good to thatch it. But otherwise, if you just put something that is breathable over it, that helps it to go. Because again, you're so right, you need that air. But what happens if you get too much brown? If it's all dead twigs and dry leaves and
not going to go anywhere.
No, doesn't it?
Because it needs something. It needs to be kind of seeded in its own way with the flora and fauna.
Yeah.
So that things like in our gut start to be digested and broken down. And this is where the microbes, this is what I love. They're our friends, they're our allies, because they do this for us, fungus and molds, and they're not something that we need to shy away from, be afraid of. They actually work for us, because if we didn't have them, what kind of a world would we be living in? There'd be just piles of detritus everywhere.
It wasn't going anywhere.
No, that it was never going to deteriorate, break down, and then give life to other things. And we see it in forests, and people are more aware of, if a tree falls, leave it.
Yeah.
You don't have to tidy everything away. In your garden too, you don't have to have a pristine garden. You can leave maybe a corner at least to be wild, and then you get the wildlife come in, you get the worms, you get the fungus, you start to see everything, the natural cycle and process of things, and how it's designed to work and how it works for us.
Yeah.
And they've known this for hundreds of years with gardening, because the first fertilizers were muck.
Yeah. Oh, muck and the dead vegetation.
Yeah.
And
stuff that you didn't use from the plants.
Yeah, and the bits of twigs that you weren't going to use, and bark and tree and all that kind of thing. The stuff that you didn't use. And it's like what happens in the forest, isn't it? Because, you know, your beautiful flowers, your bluebells and your anemones and all the things that grow in the forest, then they die down and they become the green. And then the twigs and the leaves fall and they become the brown in the forest. So it's a natural process.
And you just think, when I was at school, they sent us out and said, just collect a handful of leaf litter and bring it back. And it's like you can see these little bug hotels and things, or you have maybe a log that's from a tree that's fallen or it's been left in your garden just to naturally break down. And you find so many things, little insects and millipedes and all sorts just crawling around in there. Oh, it's so rich.
It is. And if you're able to get, you know, a really good, you know, either a lens of some sort, or if you've actually got a microscope and you can put a bit of it under there, and I've been there, so you have too.
Yeah.
Go, oh, wow, that is so beautiful, because it is.
This little microcosm that most of us, we just don't think about it. We don't have the eyes that are strong enough to see them with the naked eye. So when we can get a lens or get a microscope, it just opens up this whole new, like a whole new universe.
It is, isn't it?
Microverse.
Yeah, it's almost like, I mean, I remember the first time I saw things under a microscope like this, and it was almost like I'd just gone out into space.
Yes.
Because it was all working, it was all moving, because this was
Yeah.
all living stuff, you know, in a petri dish, like you from leaf litter. And it's like, oh my God, this is so beautiful.
We just have no concept of that unless we are fortunate enough to get to see it. And I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but there was a brilliant movie recently called Fungi, I think, just plain fungi.
It is still on. Yeah.
Fabulous movie to watch if you're interested in that kind of stuff.
And I mean, even if you never thought you'd be interested, watch it, and you'll find you are.
You're mesmerized, aren't you? And I remember when I was a child, my grandfather bought subscription of National Geographic, and there were slime molds. There was an article on slime molds. These things that they aren't animal and they aren't plant, but they're alive and they move.
And they are so ancient.
Yes.
Because slime molds are before plants and before animals. And you know, so it's quite hard to actually call them animals or plants.
They have their own classification, really, don't they?
They are a bit beyond it, really, for, well, the classification that we've got at the moment, but because they're so old. And you think, this is where life came from.
But this is where we've evolved. They came first, and then we've evolved alongside of them. And they are our allies.
Yes.
So our body uses them. We've got receptors on our cells we can interact with. And there's a whole big, I know that it's been around for a while, but it seems to be becoming more mainstream to use psychedelics now.
Yeah.
Which is part of the fungi movie, but also just plants and how all of these things can be our medicine. We take them in and they support our well-being, but also funguses like athlete's foot and stuff, they help when we're in healing phase. If we've had something going on in our body that the body then wants to release, we do that by things like bacteria and fungi. We do indeed. And we think we live sort of separate. I mean, you know, there's all the like Dettol adverts all over the TV, you know, this kills 99% of all known germs. I know that's not Dettol, but
and whichever one it is, no, but that whole idea, that phrase, is like, what? And because part of what they're killing is these incredibly valuable tiny microbes that are actually there to help us. Yeah. And I was just thinking today, because it's like you said earlier, it's actually warm today. Surprise. Yes. I know I've got long sleeves on, but you know, they're quite thin enough to be okay. And there are quite a lot of flies around. Now, people, oh, horrible fly. Oh. I must admit, I was having a bit of a fight with that in the garden, because there I was sort of releasing roses. And there was some rather cross flies around, and there was one that kept flying into my ear.
That's a little bit uncomfortable, because you just hear the buzz.
Get out of my ear. I'm trying to do something. Get out of my ear. Get out. But I don't hate flies. And it's quite fascinating sometimes. I mean, I was watching one just before I came in. I had a friend around helping with the garden. We just had lunch and things. And so we'd had lunch on the table, and we hadn't wiped the table yet. And bzzz, on the table. And she's like me, so we just watched the fly. And it was going around everywhere, which could microscopic little drops of food that we'd fallen off the plate or whatever had happened. And really, I'm not sure I could see them. I mean, I knew there must be stuff there, so I was about to wipe the table. But it found them and it was eating them. And eating them means that it was actually clearing up after me. And this is, you know, people say, what's the point of flies? Well, actually, they clear up after us.
And it's like, there was a story about vultures in Africa. We may have talked about this before, and how they weren't aesthetically pleasing. And if people were going for safaris, they didn't want to see the vultures. They wanted to see the big cats or the elephants or whatever. So they tried to eradicate the vultures, but then there was nothing to clear up the carcasses. And I was just thinking about this yesterday. These animals and the fungi, they come in and they take away the things that we need to have taken away, but they transmute them. They turn them into something that we can then use. So the fungus breaks down the tree and turns it into the compost, and we can then use that to help to grow our vegetables, whatever.
Yeah.
And like, I have tomatoes here, I have blueberries, and they love banana skins.
Yes, they do. Banana skins are actually very good. And you sort of, and this annoys me because you get some of these gardening programs and groups that say, oh, don't put banana skins in your compost. They take longer than some other things to get done, but the microbes and everything else, the bacteria, they love them, and they do turn them. They do use them and work them. But
I put banana skins in my pots and they disappear.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah, I've done that too. Yeah, yeah. And you actually use them as a base for your putting your soil in and then your seed or your young plant. Yeah.
Well, it's when the fruit is starting to ripen.
Yeah.
Because it's good for the fruit on those bushes that I put them in. And a bit of rain and time, but also it's like when we use pesticides and we use antibiotics, these things aren't selective.
No, they're not.
So antibiotic is antibacteria, that's what the word means, but it doesn't choose between what we call the good and the bad bacteria. It just wipes them. And unfortunately, we need some of what we tend to think of as the bad bacteria. To me, they aren't good and bad, they're just bacteria.
Yeah.
It's just keeping the balance as healthy as we can. But they kill off things like TB bacteria, of which there are many kinds and work in different parts of the body. But if we don't have those, they're not there to support our healing and to remove the things that we no longer need. Because we all have things growing in our bodies, cancers and tumors that will come and go, and they won't necessarily develop into anything life-threatening.
Nope, absolutely.
But how do they go? They don't go by themselves.
They go by the aid of working with the bacteria.
Yeah, but if we don't have those bacteria because we're using antibiotics too much, then they encapsulate.
And here we go.
So they're still in the body, and if that's a growth, you don't necessarily want it inside because it'll be getting in the way.
It does. And when it gets in the way, it gets life-threatening.
Well, it can do. It doesn't always, but yes, it's not. I personally wouldn't like the thought of it staying there when I could have
dealt
bacteria come and help me to get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly so. Exactly so. I was thinking about your vultures, and I know the story too. And part of the story, it was in the part of Africa where the wildebeest do their long migration, and they go across, is it the Zambezi River? It might be.
It's a big river for sure. I don't know which one.
Famous rivers. And the river is at that time full of crocodiles.
Yeah.
Crocodiles actually only need to eat about once a year. And this is how they're made. And so, you know, the harvest of wildebeest comes along. This is time for crocodiles to get their annual meal. So most of the wildebeest, well, probably at least 2/3, if not 3/4, get across, but not all of them. Some of them get eaten. And some of them get partially eaten. And bits will float down the river. And those are the bits, or the bits that are up on the bank, that the vultures then, whoa, we'll deal with that. We'll get down there and eat it. And as you said, they're not particularly pretty. And your tourist doesn't want to see vultures eating half a dead beast. I don't know quite why they don't want to, because that's what they're out there for, surely, to see nature. No, it's to see pretty things.
But it's different seeing for some reason we as humans and as westernized, domesticated, socially conditioned humans have categorized things.
Yeah.
And decided what's good and bad, and what we want to see and what we don't want to see, what is uncomfortable for us. And we've put loads of things into that. So we put death in there, we put grieving in there. But vultures, no, we don't want to see vultures because they're ugly, according to us, versus a big cat. So a lion with a kill,
it's not, I think
we see it view very differently.
Yeah, especially if it's a lioness and there's a couple of cubs around.
Yes, and the aesthetically pleasing cubs. Yes.
But anyway, they did, as you say, I think they pretty well wiped the vultures out, poisoned.
Yeah.
So not even a nice death. And then, of course, the cycle went on. The wildebeest kept on doing their migration, and the crocodiles kept on getting their annual dinner. And there was nobody to clear up the mess. So the mess stayed in the river, and the river kept on flowing. So the flow took all of this poisoned and polluted water down to the next settlement and down to the towns, and started killing the people.
And also, if you think of times when you get algae overgrowth, or rivers change color because, like when we have rains here and we've put chemical fertilizers on crops, the rains wash those off. They wash off the topsoil, because when we have a crop, it's like a row, and then all in between is bare soil.
And also the crops
all gets washed away.
Have very shallow roots because we dig them up every year.
Yeah.
So they never have a chance to grow decent roots to hold the soil.
To stabilize that. So it all gets washed away, and that flow goes into the rivers and down into the oceans, and we get all sorts of pollution going on.
Lots of pollution and lots of poisons and things that actually do affect us.
Well, yeah, if they're a pesticide, they work on the pests, or what we decide is in that category.
Yeah.
They work on those insects mostly and cellular organisms by exploding them.
Yes.
So our guts are made up of cells. And we have more of them, and we are a bigger creature, and potentially it won't harm us to the degree of dying, but it still causes impacts.
It does.
And we have so many people now who are suffering things like leaky gut and IBS. It makes me question how much of that, I know there's other issues going on, stress and so on, but how much of that is also to do with the fact that our diet isn't as nutritious as it used to be, and that it's covered in all of these sprays.
I think covered in all of these sprays is a big one. And we're not growing food that we eat baby food. In that sense, we really do, because a carrot, you see a fully grown carrot that has been going for a few years.
When we moved in here, the people who had been living here before had planted up, we've got some veg plots down there, they planted with carrots and beetroot, can't remember what else. The carrots were like this, they were woody and old, so we cut them up and gave them to the horses. The beetroots were literally the size of footballs.
Yeah. And
I had never realized that they were that size.
I did, because of having gardening uncles and things who would let things grow, but those things actually hold the soil, and they actually help the water and the minerals and the food go across the soil, and they eventually get linked up to, we're back to fungus again, aren't we? They get linked up to the fungus, and the whole thing happens. And I think people don't realize that most of the food we eat, and that includes the meat most people eat, is not even teenage, really.
No.
I mean, your cabbages are not, your carrots are not, your cauliflowers are not.
But if you think of the names for things, lamb, what is a lamb?
It's a baby
It's a
sheep.
young sheep. It's not a sheep. So if you're eating sheep, that would be mutton.
Yeah, or if you're doing really well, it'll be, what's the hell's the 3-year-old?
I don't know. I don't eat meat.
I can't remember. But yeah, that was when you were eating meat that was grown up.
Yeah.
It's the same with fish.
Yeah.
Do you know, I mean, yeah, I know you do, but I wonder how many people know how big a fully grown cod is.
Whoa.
Big as me.
Mm.
Yeah. And same with lobsters. A fully grown lobster is like that.
You don't see them very often anymore, though, do you? Because
we don't let them grow.
We take them before they get to that stage.
Yeah. And so it makes you sort of wonder. And when they die, they get taken up and eaten by not vultures in Britain, because we don't actually have any. They do in France, so vultures go and eat things in France. But they get eaten by all the smaller stuff, and then, I mean, you might get eaten by a fox, because you found a skull today that isn't a fox, but it might have been brought there by a fox.
And we have some big birds of prey. We might not have vultures, but we've got kites and we've got buzzards. So buzzards carrion feeders.
Yeah, we do too here. So, and ravens we've got.
Yeah, carrion crows, again, carrion.
Yeah. So
these are our cleanup crew.
Happen, and that takes us back into compost rather nicely, because of course they eat them like we do, and they get all the goodness that they need. But the stuff that they eat that is actually not any good for them, just like there is for us. And I mean, you can eat your cabbage, but there'll be bits of it that
you can't digest.
They
it's
don't
cellulose.
Go into your digestive system. They don't mingle with your blood. They don't go to build your organs. And if our guts are working properly, we get rid of those cheerfully, hopefully, every day in what Robin and I are quite happy to call shit. It's an old Anglo-Saxon word. It means feces. And so we getting rid of our shit every day, our physical shit from eating. The animals are. That goes, for the animals particularly, that goes back onto and then into it goes onto the soil. And then the beetles and the little creatures and the worms come up and they actually eat it, and they bring it down into the soil, and it goes through them. So it's processed again and goes out into the soil. And that is what grows our lovely fruit and veg that we eat. So it's like getting a whole new, composting for me is like getting a whole new relationship. And you were saying about the life cycle, or death cycle.
Life, death,
whichever way you want to start from. That is happening in us all every day. And I mean, your horses, they produce muck.
They do, rather a lot of it.
I know. My friend down there, hers do.
We have neighbours and people from the community who come and they take it for their garden, because we've got quite a lot of people around here who have allotments and grow their own fruit and veg and stuff. So they're always coming up here and getting a trailer load or a few bags worth.
Yeah.
Because they know that it's really valuable stuff and they've seen the results. My horses are just living very naturally outside 24/7, 365.
Yep.
They get organic food. There are no real sprays around here. So it's just grass and hay and a few bits of supplements. Yeah. And so that's what's in their food. Yeah. I keep as many chemicals away as I possibly can.
Yeah. And just occasionally you might need an antibiotic if something is particularly bad that needs to be stopped before You know, I was thinking of a friend whose horses, one of them split a hoof, and he's not going to be able to work or do very much for a year while it all grows out. But of course, at the beginning, it was part of like keeping it clean, because otherwise it would just spread up the leg. And
well, they're amazing, because my two have both had abscesses, which then burst.
Yeah.
And we are told, and this is what I had heard before I had horses of my own and before I had them here, that you actually put a nappy on their foot.
That's
because
right.
a nappy has all of that gel that draws all the toxins out, I was told, and you have to keep it clean and you bathe it. My two won't let me near them, but they've never had a problem.
No.
Because they are working very naturally with their environment, and I guess with the bacteria. And if you think back, or think about native peoples who are still living out in the rainforests or whatever, what do? They use plants, they use mosses, they use bark for making teas. If you ever go to a Chinese medicine shop, you'll see all the array of wonderful things that they use, plants, all the plants that they use. So nature is very good all on her own. And I have regularly had cuts and things, and I just go up to the fields and I pick. And I wash my hands when I come back. I wash my hands before I eat. But getting all that muck in small cuts and stuff, I've been worried in the past, and people have said to me, you'll get infection. I never have.
No, I never have either. I mean, I have a small wound here where a rose bit me through my glove. So this one was a bit cross of being neglected for so long. So I did say sorry after I'd said ow a lot. And but I haven't done anything to that. Wash my hands when I came in, but I was wearing gloves as well. And my immune system is getting stuff from the garden, the herbs, all the time, as yours is. And there's the old one, you'll let your food be your medicine be your food. So if you're eating well, you'll be able to work with those bacteria, and they won't come along and damage you. They will just do the healing.
And in the work that I do, we don't get sick because of what comes in. We get sick because of what's inside. So if we're holding stress, we go through a period of time when the body's making changes, adaptations to support us. There's always a purpose to what our body does. So it's making adaptations in order to support us to cope with that stress in some way. And then when that stress finishes and is past and the body needs to get back to balance, it has to undo all those changes. And that's where we get the bacteria coming into play, the fungus, because they help us to undo all of those changes. And unfortunately, that can be rather unpleasant, uncomfortable, hence dis-ease. And that's where we can have symptoms. But those symptoms are just saying, well, your body's detoxing.
Coming back.
Your body's going through a healing process. And unfortunately, we don't get told that. We get told pain is not something that you want to experience, so have these painkillers. And absolutely, there can be a place for medication, because sometimes if it's a very intense stress, the healing will be very intense, and it will either be exceptionally uncomfortable or even life-threatening. So sometimes we need to take action, like with maybe the antibiotics for that horse, or painkillers. I'm sure horse hooves, when they split, they're exceptionally painful.
Well, he was in a bit of a state, yes.
Yeah, I can imagine. So there's a place for medication, but also there's a place for trusting that the body's doing its natural and normal thing. And when we can look after it, give ourselves the rest, the space, the time, the compassion, the gentleness. And if we're up to eating the right foods, and when we're stressed, generally what we do is we reach for caffeine and we reach for sugar because they're the quick energy fix and they help us to do the fighting or the fleeing. But in the second phase, either we don't want to eat because we're not feeling very well, or if we do want to eat, what we want is those nutritious things. So it might be the kind of, people talk about chicken soup, don't they, or chicken noodle soup. But for me as a vegan, it would be nice chunky vegetable soups or stews or casseroles, something that's really warming and full of all those vitamins and minerals. So eating the rainbow, basically.
Yeah. Whereas for me, who is not a vegan at all, I'm paleo keto, I will go for, because I'm able to get, actually lots of people could, fresh wild venison.
Yep.
And
there's more and more of it available now, isn't there?
Well, they're actually getting sensible that, you know, we actually do have too many deer because we don't have any lynx and we don't have any wolves. And the deer are actually eating us out of trees, which is actually eventually eating us out of oxygen. So, and it's not, doesn't do the deer very much good to be in a huge herd where there's too many of them, so that lots of them miss out. So people that I know, they've got very good deer stalkers, and they go out and they will kill the deer at the right time. So I mean, nobody kills a young female when she's pregnant or when she's got babies or anything like that. It's all sorted on that level. But these creatures have been out eating wild food.
Yes.
They've been out,
and they've been living a natural life. They've been living an unstressed, unmedicated life.
yes.
So we get all of that natural goodness.
And the other thing is, they also, because I know that I've been out with these people, when they shoot them, they are very good shots.
Yeah,
and
clean.
Totally clean. I mean, you get a really good one, they will either put a bullet straight in the heart, or one of my friends, he normally takes them straight through the eye.
Yeah.
And the animal jumps, which is a sort of shock reaction, and then falls down. And they all use silencers on the guns,
so it doesn't distress the rest of the herd.
and the rest of the herd's like, oh, Fred's gone, oh, all right, back to eating. And it's like, whoa. Because there's, again, if an animal dies in stress, it's full of adrenaline and other,
and I have a friend whose husband is a butcher, and he actually is a very high level butcher. He trains people to be butchers. Yeah. And he was saying, which I had never realized, this is some time ago, that when you cut open a carcass to butcher it, you can tell, was this animal a stressed animal or a not stressed animal?
Absolutely, you can. Yeah, the color, there's color and scent that do that. I mean, I have butchered deer because I wanted to learn, and I used to be strong enough to do it. And you absolutely, it's fascinating. And in the old ways, they call it unmaking, which is really lovely. And you can tell whether the deer was healthy, whether it was stressed, how it had lived, all from colors and tastes and smells that you will get as you open the animal up.
That's really interesting, because if you can do that with a deer, it's another mammal, you can do that with us.
Yes.
So to think that the body, you might not see it on the outside, sometimes you will, because if we've got disturbances in your balance, it'll show quite often in your skin, in your hair, in your nails, but not always, and we don't always notice. But that you can see it in the very tissues, in the fascia, because the fascia gets dry and tight, and you can see it in the muscles, and you can see it in the bones, and you can see it in the color of the tissues. Yes. And you can, to a degree, if you look in the eyes or your gums, or because I learned to do that with horses when I did my training.
Absolutely.
You can do it with your dog. You can, any animal, you can look at these tissues. Well, it depends on the cat. Some of them, a ragdoll cat maybe, but not the cat that we had, no. And they've got sharp teeth dogs too, so if be careful if you're going to be doing this. But how we can tell, and how many different colors there are to a healthy gum versus an unhealthy gum.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating stuff.
It is. And then there's the totally amazing thing which people sort of go, oh, at, and that is the Bristol stool scale.
Oh yes, very important.
Which is totally vital. Now, when I was little, and probably when you were too, when you went to the doctors looked in your mouth, looked at your tongue, told you to say ah, took your pulse, and also asked your mum what your shit was like.
Yes. Well, my mum asked it regularly because my mum worked in the medical profession.
Yeah, yeah.
My mum, can I just interject with a little story?
Please
My
do.
mum had a stroke recently, and
Oh,
she's fine.
okay.
She was in the hospital, and they would come round every day and they would ask very discreetly, have your bowels moved and how was it? And this brought back a memory of a story that her boss, when she worked in a hospital, told, because when he was very small, he was having his tonsils out, I think, so he was in hospital, and there were all the boys lined up in the beds. And the nurse would come around every morning. So his first morning, they came up and said, have your bowels moved? And the nurse was distracted and called away or something. So he turned to the boy in the bed next to him and said, what does that mean? And the boy said, I don't know. But if you say yes, it makes them very happy. So all of these boys had no idea what the question was. So they weren't answering the question, but they were all just saying, yes, nurse.
Oh dear. We think we're being so proper and all this sort of thing by saying, have your bowels moved today? And well, yes, I got up and did a walk, so obviously they came with me,
I didn't leave them behind.
No, honestly, I didn't leave them in the chair. It was fine. And whereas, if you're a little bit more basic about the whole thing, your child would understand. I mean, I was, and the doctor would usually sort of literally say, and how is her shit? And mum would say, it's a bit off, it's a bit smelly, it's a bit greenish colored or too pale or something like that.
Well, she hasn't been this week.
Exactly, yeah, which did happen at one point. And the doctor would know so much about it.
Yeah.
And what set me off with a little story, being paleo keto, I've been paleo for quite a long time, but getting the whole thing together was that I have rheumatoid arthritis, osteoporosis, and I did have diabetes and IBS and a couple of other autoimmune diseases. And I took medications for them because if I didn't take the medications, I decided life wasn't really worth the effort, which is not good. And so I thought, actually, I don't like this. Come home with a Sainsbury's bag full of meds, and I think, really? And so I started to read and read and read, and there was stuff, and you go through Google and libraries and everything. And eventually I started to find doctors who were actually talking about leaky gut, as you were earlier. And so, interesting. And I found a couple of doctors who were very readable, but they also talked you through the whole chemistry of what was actually going on and what was making what happen. And of course, one of the worst things, I mean, we were laughing about hay and that we loved the smell of it, but actually we didn't have any of the right innards to eat hay. Well, in a sense, people do, because you eat bread. And bread is effectively made from a grass.
Yeah, it's not the stalk, but yes.
No, but the seeds, and it's the seeds that have, and grass is actually quite an aggressive plant.
Oh, it is. That's why it's so successful.
Exactly. And it fights for its life.
Yeah.
It wants to be, it wants its seeds to be transported and taken around, but it doesn't want them to be destroyed when they go through a creature's gut. And whether it's a bird or a horse or whatever. So it's got all sorts of mechanisms, including poisons, which make sure that somehow it gets out as whole as possible at the other end. And of course, it turns up too in a nice little packet of fertilizer, so it can seed, grow really well. And we have to process wheat, it's grass that we call wheat, incredibly before we can eat it, because we have to take the outer shells and things which are all actually spiky and will go through. You have to take all the poisons out and everything like this. So, and if you don't, they come through and they affect your autoimmune system. And since what I had was autoimmune diseases, I thought, I think I'd better read this. So I did. And I got myself, I don't eat carbs now at all. Because the same thing happens in a smaller degree when you eat beans, because beans are also defensive and they have the mechanisms.
And carrots and things like that are quite starchy. The root
they're very
vegetables.
starchy as well. They don't have quite the same mechanisms.
No, and they're not seeds. They're a different part of the
No, they're a root, yeah. And so I decided, okay, I won't eat them. It's quite a cold turkey process, actually, getting yourself off bread and carbs and
it is, yeah, it's huge. Because I went off milk because I was diagnosed with lactose intolerance.
Yeah.
But the guy that I went to see back in the day when I was diagnosed, he said it's actually probably not the milk per se, it's the fact that the cows are eating the grass that has been so sprayed, so highly sprayed.
Yeah.
So there's the whole toss up about what is it exactly, and probably various elements that our bodies are responding to. So if you're thinking of grass and wheat, it's sprayed. And they spray glyphosate on wheat to make it wilt in order to make it easier to harvest. So we're taking that in as well. And everything that they put on the plant, you can't wash it off because it goes into the cells. So there's a website, and it's the Dirty Dozen 15 clean or 10 clean or something. So you can see which, because it changes over time, which are the cleanest vegetables, which are the least sprayed, and which are the ones that you probably want to buy organic. So if you don't want to buy everything organic, or you can't afford to buy everything organic, but even organic, there's a certain question mark over how unmolested it is, because it might be blown in or washed in with weather and stuff.
But there is this thing too. I mean, I only ate organic bread from organic flour, which was actually grown in this country, because I knew how to do it. And I'd done that for 20 years. And when I stopped eating it, I no longer have diabetes. I no longer have IBS. I no longer have another couple of diseases that I had. And I tried this. I thought, okay, because I got some friends around, they were eating toast. And toast is, like one of those smells that's.
Oh, yes. Toast is always a disappointment. It smells wonderful. And when I eat it,
it's not quite so.
No.
Anyway, I thought, no, I'm going to try eating bread. So I started eating bread again. And I was so ill. I got all the old symptoms back, even the beginnings of diabetes, which scared the shit out of me, because you would die from that. And so I thought, right, that's it. So I had to go through a mini process of effectively detoxing my body again. But it is about this. This was stuff that had not been sprayed.
But even then, because our bodies make connections.
I take what you're saying, but having looked at the workings of the grass seed and what it can do, I think certainly for me and for quite a lot of people, that is what did it. But you shouldn't.
I'm not saying that's not true.
You shouldn't be eating stuff that's been sprayed.
No, we are designed, and I do this with when I'm working with people around animals, specific, species appropriate nutrition.
Yeah.
So horses, grass and hay, rather than molasses, because they're not designed to eat sweet foods.
Yeah.
And
or
cats
even
must.
Yeah.
Cats must have meat.
Yeah.
Dogs less so, but cats must, and they must have cat food, not dog food, because the percentage of meat.
Yeah.
If you're like working,
and it's different. It's differently processed.
Yeah. And we have our own foods. And they say that if you are born in a location like we're in the UK, eat UK or European food.
Absolutely.
If you're born in Australia, eat Australian food. If you're born in America, but we don't do that anymore, do we? Because we ship food all over the world.
All over the world.
But also when we're shipping it, we put preservatives on it and do all sorts. And lemons, for example, I need to be careful not to buy the waxed lemons because that's not vegan. which is great because I don't want waxed lemons anyway.
But no, yeah, it is being careful like that. And if you eat the food of the country that you're living in, then it helps you. It gives you its immune stuff that will help your immune system, and you acclimatize to that. I mean, one of the standard ones, which you probably know, is if you suffer from like hay fevery type eye problems, which I do, if you take honey from bees local to you
that are bringing in that pollen,
it will help you manage your condition, if not clear it up altogether, which it does in a lot of cases.
But there are also the fact,
if you take some of, you'd say, oh, I want Macuba honey, from South America. That won't work because we're not in South America. Different pollen, different flowers.
And this is where it's really difficult because we find these things that are very good. Manuka honey is great for wounds and things, but they may have done that experimentation and research in its native country.
Yeah.
We are designed, and I was listening to a friend of mine who's an aromatherapist recently, and she was saying here in Europe and in the UK, we work with lavender oil.
Yeah.
Lavender oil is our go-to oil.
Absolutely.
Because we have evolved alongside those plants and we are interconnected. We can use the properties of those plants because we're so close to them. Yeah. In Australia, they use tea tree.
Yeah.
Because that is their go-to and it's grown in their country and in their climate and everything. Yeah. But there's also, when you talk about things like allergies, hay fever, all those things, our body is responding because it's made a connection. Yeah. So we have connected that pollen with a stress. Yeah. And if we can remove the stress, the pollen no longer affects us. Because I used to get, when I moved to England, first of all, from Ireland before moving to Wales, I suddenly got terrible hay fever. Never had it before. And used to spend lots of summer holidays out in fields and all the rest of it, under trees. Moved here, trees were my worst. Lime trees particularly.
Oh my God, yes.
And my eyes would be out to here, my throat, I would get blood blisters in my throat and in my mouth, and it was so itchy, and I would sneeze and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep at night because I would be sneezing so much. And essential oils actually helped with that. Yeah. But what really got rid of it for me, because I don't take any medication anymore, and I used to take medication and felt like it didn't touch anything. Yeah. Now I don't take medication because I did EFT. Yeah. Because the EFT addressed the stress. I don't even particularly know what the stress was. I didn't need to. And this is where I love techniques such as EFT, because you don't necessarily have to relive whatever was so upsetting. You can just tap and breathe, tap on how you're feeling right now. So I just tapped on, my nose is really itchy, my eyes are really itchy. And it brought the symptoms down to the point where I might sneeze once. Yeah. And I don't need medication anymore.
And the techniques that I use, I don't use EFT. I know it and I know it works and that sort of thing. But the basic exercise that we were all trained in the village that my people use, which is a breathing exercise, and it's a connection exercise which connects you to the earth and to the sun and then to everything around you. And at first it takes you a bit of time to get used to doing it, but most people that I work this with clients all the time, most people within 2 weeks, if not before, they've got it. So they feel it start coming on, they're out in the garden mowing the lawn or something, feel something like it start coming on, stop, you're okay.
This is what I love about the whole plant thing. Yeah. That if we're eating and using the plants in our own environment, we're connecting with that nature. And it's all about whatever technique you use, it's about getting back to that sense of connection and that sense of safety. Because in those two, we can let go of the stress. We don't, it's not, it serves a purpose when we have that stress. We're in fight or flight for a reason. or
And
whatever
it's like,
stress
wake up,
response
you
we're in.
need to stop doing this and just have a quick, take a moment, as they say.
Yeah.
And right. Now I can see clearly.
Yes. Now I feel connected. Now I feel rooted. Now I feel grounded. Now I feel safe. I don't need all of that stuff anymore. And that's really what my ME, I carried ME for a long time. And then I was able just to put it down because I realized I don't need this anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's such a sense of freedom, isn't it?
It is. And so many of the things that we feel, well, we feel like the stresses that we have in life, they can actually be like protection mechanisms we've built up.
Yeah. Well, they're our armor, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Brene Brown in her Braving the Wilderness talks about armoring up. Not to
It's
armor
such
up,
an
not to
alchemical
puff
thing,
up,
that to me. Yeah.
not to shrink back. And what I love when she comes, she's worked through, she talks about having a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. And she says in the end, not to be afraid of the wilderness, because we are the wilderness.
We are the wilderness. We are the wilderness.
It is our environment. It's where we are designed to be. And when we step into that and we can own that, then we don't need to be afraid anymore.
And we realize that we are part of the wild. We are wild nature ourselves, and embrace it.
Yeah.
What a place to stop.
Yeah.
Lovely to see you all again this month. We'll see you next. So bye for now.
Bye for now. See you next month.